Hey, what's up friends? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for sticking around. And today we're going to conclude our entity framework stored procedures videos portion of the series. And when I say conclude, I just mean that we're going to actually use entity framework to do all the stuff that we kind of did before, and we're going to use our extension method a little bit more robustly. So if you were here last time, the last two videos, what we did was we added some stored procedures to our database, and we are calling those stored procedures through our controller via the repository. And so I've got two of them right here, two controller methods. One of them is getRoomsSP, and then one of them is getRoomsSP extension. I'm going to move this out of the way so you can see what exactly is going on here. So here's my rooms controller, and you can see I've got two methods. Here it is getRoomsSP, and then getRoomsSP or SP extension. And those each call a method in the rooms repository. If I can get it to go over here. There we go. All right, make that a little bit larger. Okay, so here in the rooms repository, this first method here, getAllRoomsSP, I've actually hard-coded the name of the stored procedure into the repository. And then down here in the second method, getAllRoomsFromExtension, I have not hard-coded it. Instead, this calls the extension from our context class. That's this one right over here. And it's kind of more of a dynamic thing. It sends the name of the stored procedure through as this SQL string, any parameters that might go along with it, and then the extension method takes care of executing that SQL via here, the .from SQL raw command right there. And so this makes it a little bit more reusable. I can essentially send any SQL command that I want to as far as stored procedures or executions or whatever goes, any parameters that might or might not go along with it. Remember, we set the parameters to null immediately. So if there are no parameters, then it doesn't matter. But if there are parameters, then something happens there. And then this, of course, will execute and send back our results, in this case as a room. So it's not like totally perfect in this portion here, but the extension method is completely reusable. So when we get to the furniture portion of our app, we can make another method in here in our repository that instead returns or furniture objects, and then, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the idea there, which again makes this more reusable. So now what I want to do is I want to come full circle, and I want to first of all clean this up a little bit, because remember what we've got is these two methods here. This is the first one that has it hard-coded in the rooms repository. So if I execute that, it will return all of the rooms just like normal. The other method here, rooms by extension, is the one that's not hard-coded in the repository, and instead it will it's hard-coded in the controller, which is more ideal in our case, because we want to keep as much of the cleanliness in the repository class that we can, and anything that we change or move around, we're going to put that in our controller. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to bring this back over here so I can see what's going on. And then what I'm going to do first is I want to clean up my controller. So we don't actually need this first method here anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it. And I'm going to rename this method to just simply getRooms. So there we go. And in the rooms repository, because I'm no longer using that first one where I'm calling the getRooms or whatever, I don't actually need this one either. So I'm going to actually remove it from here. So if you remember, it's called getAllRoomsSP. So I'm going to remove it from the contract first, and then I'll remove it from here as well, because it's just no longer needed. Now, ideally, what you'd want to do is comment these out, but because we're not putting our app out for production and we don't intend to use it in that way, then we're not going to worry too much about that. So I'm going to save those so that they're all on track. And there we go. So now all I've got is this one method here, getAllRoomsFromExtension. And that's going to always call this extension method, which will always execute whatever I send to it. So now what I want to do is, back in the controller, I'm going to keep this method here, because it's just going to be getRooms, and it's going to send the SP getAllRooms. But what I want to do now is I want to make a new stored procedure. And this stored procedure is going to be a little bit more dynamic. See, the idea right here is that I'm getting all the rooms no matter what. But what if I want to get just one room? Is there a way that I can do that in one particular method? And the answer is yes, I can. So we're going to open up our package manager console. And the first thing we need to do is create the stored procedure that's going to allow us to do this. So in order to do that, open up your package manager console, and we're going to type in add migration, and we're going to call this, we'll call it sp get rooms dynamic. All right, and then that should add a migration builder to us, and it should be empty. If it's just like this, it's empty, so we can just go ahead and throw in some code in here. And then inside this code here, the first part, the up method, we're going to say var sp for the stored procedure, and I'm going to say equals, and then we're going to put an @ symbol so we can interpolate the string, and then we're going to just put a string of stuff in there that is going to represent our new stored procedure. So bear with me on this one as I type all this out. I don't want to copy and paste. I want you to kind of create it along with me. So we're going to say create procedure, and make sure you get your spelling correctly in this, because any spelling mistakes are going to result in disaster. I'm going to call this stored procedure sp underscore get all rooms dynamic. And the reason I'm calling it that is because it will be essentially a dynamic method, because I'll be able to either get all the rooms or just one room at a time. Now, if I'm getting one room at a time, I want to make sure that I have a variable to capture that. So I'm going to call that @roomID, and it's going to be of the type int. Now down here is where I start my stored procedure. I'm going to actually just go ahead and enter down one more line so I can see it a little bit better. So that's going to be as, and then this is where the stored procedure will begin. Oof, that was close. All right, and then I'm going to set the no count to on, end it with a semicolon, and now we say if @roomID is not null. So if I send a value in for the room ID, I want to execute this first line of code, or this block of code. So I'm going to say begin, and then in this, I'm going to tell it to select all of the fields from, and I'm going to say home furnishings.dbo.rooms, and I'm going to give that an alias of r, and then we're going to say where the r.id equals @roomID. And so this first block of code here is essentially saying, oops, I'm going to put this back there. There we go. This first block of code is basically saying if the stored procedure is called and there is a value for the room ID, which is right here, if the room ID is not null, so it's got a value, then we're going to select all of the fields from the home furnishings.dbo.rooms r, where r.id equals @roomID. Okay. Now what happens if it has a value? Well, that's where the next section comes in, and we're going to say, ooh, hold on one second. I put this in the wrong spots. I'm going to put it right there. That's what I want. I'm going to say else. And then we're going to say begin. And then this time we're just going to say select star. And the same thing from home furnishings.dbo.rooms r, not really a necessary alias there, but I'll just do it anyways for completion, and then we'll just end, because I don't need to do anything special here other than, you know, get all of the rooms, because that's essentially what I'm doing here. So as a review, what I've got is if the room ID is not null, that means I haven't passed a value to it, then I'm going to get the specific room that I'm looking for based on the ID. Otherwise, I'm just going to get all the rooms. Okay? And that's it. That's really all I have to do. And so now I will say migration builder dot SQL, and then pass in the SQL stored procedure that we just made, this one right here, the var sp, and that's it. Should be done. And so we can go ahead and save that with a Control S, and then I'm going to say update database, and then that should update it with that stored procedure. We shouldn't see any errors. Cool, looks good. And then you can actually check on it by going to SQL Object Explorer, and here in stored procedures, I'm going to hit refresh, and boom, there it is. Get all rooms dynamic. And if I take a look at it, I should be able to execute this stored procedure. So if I send it as a null, that should give me, let me see if I can expand this a little bit because it's being silly. There we go. That gives me all of my rooms, as you can see, listed right there. But what if I were to say, give it a number and give it like say a value of 1 and execute it? That should give me just 1 room. And this will work for any of the rooms that I put in here. And there we go. So that's perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. That works. I'm going to go ahead and close that without saving because I don't need to. I can close that and we're good. And so now, because it's Entity Framework, if this were to be deployed, remember the very first thing that happens once a app like this gets deployed is all of these migrations get run on a database. And so that stored procedure would get created, so it would immediately exist. Okay, this one unfortunately would not because we did not create this that way, but we'll get rid of this eventually in the near future. For right now though, I've got my rooms repository. Everything's good there. I don't need to make any changes here. All I need to do is change up how I call it for my next method. So this one is going to be an HTTP GET. And by the way, I am in the controller of the API again. So I've got an HTTP GET. And what I want to do is I'm going to name this something, again, that I can really use for testing. So I'm going to say get rooms dynamic. There we go, so that I know. And then, I don't know what all that is, but I'm just going to close those. And then I can come down here and we're going to make a new method. It's going to be an async method that returns a task of action result, just like we've been doing, an IEnumerable, and this is going to be of room. And I'm going to call this get rooms dynamic. And just to keep things simple, this isn't advisable in production code for sure, but I'm going to go ahead and just pull from the query what room ID I want. And because the room ID doesn't necessarily have to be passed in, I'm going to put that question mark there so that it means it is nullable. So this from query tag here tells me that in addition to get rooms dynamic, I can also have a query added onto it as well. And that query is going to be called room ID, and it may or may not exist. And that's what the question mark is telling me. So it's going to be an integer. It may or may not exist. And if it doesn't, that's okay. We'll be fine. But if it does exist, then I want you to use it in this particular method. So now I'm going to populate the parameters that I would normally be putting. This may look familiar to you. I'm going to populate the parameters that I would be seeing in my, the extension method. So I'm going to say new SQL parameter. There we go. And that's going to be like that. I want to make sure I import this SQL data client right here. Or sorry, data.SQL client. And then here we're going to say parameter name, because that's the part of the class that I need to populate. And we're going to call it room ID, because that's what we called it in our stored procedure, if you recall. I'll just bring it up again real quick. And again, I'm here in SQL Server Management Studio. But if I go here and modify, so we called it room ID with a capital I. I want to make sure that matches. So this is going to be room ID. And then I'm going to also say, oops, I need a comma there. I'm going to say value is equal to the room ID that we, the room ID that we got passed in up here. And I'm going to say if it has no value, then we're just going to convert it to db null, just like that. And so that's going to be a database version of the null that will get passed to it if it doesn't have any value. But if it does have value, then it's going to keep its value. And we're going to say SQL db type, and this is system.data.SQL dbtype.int, which will be exactly what we want. And I don't need that comma there. I can finish this second curly brace off with a semicolon, and then we're ready for the actual method that we need. So this right here is basically populating the parameters thing that this extension is expecting right here. See, object parameters. Now normally it's null if it doesn't get past anything. But if it does get past something, then it won't be null. It'll actually have value, and it'll use that value in this method right here, where it passes it to the database along with the stored procedure command. So back here, I just need to finish the rest of this method to make it actually do stuff. So we're going to say var rooms equals await, and we're going to call the room repository, and it's going to be the get all rooms from extension this time. And now we're going to pass the name of the stored procedure. So it should be sp, and what did I call it again? I cannot remember. Let me just make sure, because it has to be correct. Sp get all rooms dynamic. So I'm actually going to copy it from here just to make sure that I get it correct, because again, this is a string, and if I mess up the string at all, that could be bad news bears. And then I'm going to add in at room ID here, because that is what it's expecting as a parameter. Again, here's the at room ID int, and it may be null, and that's okay if it is, but if it's not, then it will, of course, send that value. So after this quote, I'm going to put a comma, then type in parameters, and so now I'm sending the parameters along with my SQL command. And then I'm just going to return OK rooms. So what I've got going on now is if I call this get rooms dynamic with some sort of integer value for my room ID, it's going to set that into the parameters, and then the parameters are going to be sent along with not just the stored procedure name, but also the name of the value that should be going along with it. If you've got a stored procedure that has more than one, you just string them along. With the parameters, you can actually add more SQL parameters to it if you want, because it is essentially an object array. So if I had, like, say, two things, not just the room ID, but also the room name, I could make another new SQL parameter. I'll copy it and show you just real quick. I can make a new SQL parameter down here that would essentially do the exact same thing. It's just, I would have a comma there, I believe. Yep. And then I would just fill all these out with the expected value. So maybe this would be room name, and that should be the same. It would be same idea, but maybe I have a room name value here, and then this would be probably, let's see, dot varchar. Yeah, that would work. Oops, not the int. Varchar. There we go. So because the room name, of course, is going to be a string, or in SQL terminology, a varchar. And so you can just keep on stringing those on if you've got more and more different parameters to send. And, you know, that's it. That's how you send multiple parameters with your one stored procedure. Okay, but we don't need that right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that. And get rid of that last little comma there. I know it's not erroring or anything, but for cleanliness sake. All right. And so with that, I think we're done and ready to go, ready to test this. So let's see if this actually works. Probably won't, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. All right. So there is my my controller method that I've created, get rooms dynamic. That's right there. It's all this here. I'm going to go ahead and try it out. You see right here now I've got a spot where I can actually send in a room ID. I want to actually see if it'll get everything that it's supposed to without a room ID though first. So that should send back, yep, my list of rooms, just like that. All right, and so now I'm going to send just a room ID of 2. Let's see if that works. Hey, and it did. Look at that. Cool. So it's kind of a dynamic method here where I can just send rooms back and forth. And then another way that you can actually test this too is because this is showing you the actual URL here. So if you do this and say https://localhost, I believe it's 5001, and we say API/rooms/get rooms, what do we call it? Get rooms dynamic. I should be able to, yep, there we go. There's all of my rooms all listed there. Now this is in Chrome, of course, so I'm actually going to copy this and I'm going to open up a new instance of Firefox, because Firefox, at least for me, I have an extension installed that shows the JSON just like that, so I can actually read it. And because as I mentioned before, this is a dynamic sort of method, I should be able to enter in a query string. So if I'm not mistaken, it should be question mark and then room ID equals and then 2, and yep, there we go. And I can get just one room in particular from that list. And I know I keep picking 2 and 4, I'm trying to be random. Let's go with 1. There we go. And if I send in a value that doesn't actually have anything like 5, I should just get nothing, which is exactly what happens. So there we go. So our stored procedures are in place. And this is, in my opinion, a nice way of bringing together the old and the new, because a lot of newer applications don't really work with stored procedures. It's expected that you're going to be building everything from code out, but if you already have a database in place, sometimes it's good to have a stored procedure to work with those things instead, to work with that data. So I'm going to shut that down, and with that, we are done with the stored procedures. And next time, I'm going to try and do a little bit more with what we've got here. We're going to try and actually work on the front end of the application then, and display the stuff in a little bit more fancier way, because right now, as it is, if I'm not mistaken, it just gives us a list of rooms and cards, and I don't even know if it actually still works, because remember, we've removed some of the methods and stuff. Let me look. Yeah, I've got a load failed going on here, so that's okay. We will fix that. Oh wait, I think I know why. Didn't I change something in here? It doesn't matter. We'll figure it all out. And with that, we will fix the front end next time, and we'll get it all squared away and maybe do some cool stuff with it. So anyways, thanks for hanging out, and I will see you in the next video.